All right, welcome back. This is our TFM, still playing music and talking to people that make a difference here. I'm in the studio at Claris. I'm Rent Gorta, and you're listening to the Island Club on Friday afternoons. And today I have with me here Tim Higham, who is the Hauraki Gulf Forum manager. Now, hello, Tim.
Good day, Rent. Good to be on the island.
Good. I understand you are actually a resident, or rather, you have property here on the island. You're what we call a part-time resident.
That's right.
Okay, good. Maybe before we start, just briefly introduce yourself and your role in the Hauraki Gulf Forum, and your history perhaps with the forum. And just
Yeah. Well, the forum is created under the Hauraki Gulf Marine Park Act, and that's a piece of legislation that recognises that the Hauraki Gulf is a pretty special place, but it's also under a huge amount of pressures from different uses. So the Hauraki Gulf Forum brings together all the management agencies with responsibilities in the Gulf. So we have Department of Conservation, Ministry of Fisheries, Ministry of Maori Affairs, Auckland Council, including now the local boards from Waiheke and Great Barrier, and the Waikato councils that feed into the catchment of the Gulf. So it's an opportunity for all those organisations to bring the information that they collect together and ask whether it adds up to making a difference or it doesn't. And that's really what this report was about.
can you maybe go a little bit more into the history of how the forum came to be? What prompted the creation, and how was it set up originally?
Before the amalgamations of local government in 87, there was a Hauraki Gulf Maritime Park, and with its own rangers and a lot of public support for that. When that went out of existence, there was a feeling that there needed to be a better job done for the Gulf, and a lot of lobbying occurred, and boating clubs, recreational fishing groups, conservation groups created a momentum. It was picked up by the National Party, introduced into Parliament, and it actually became the first piece of legislation passed by the new Labour government in 2000 and was introduced by Sandra Lee, the Alliance Party's conservation minister at the time. So it's got a broad base of support.
And just since when have you been involved with the forum, and what's the history of how it kind of then took its place, and were its first activities?
So the members are the politicians, if you like, or representatives of the ministers of those departments. My job is, as the manager, is as an executive officer, so I identify the issues, I commission the reports like this one, I put together the agendas for their meetings to try to get them focused on the important long-term big picture questions that they don't look at individually. So it's a sort of peer group. It's a bit like the United Nations. I worked for 6 years for the United Nations, and I sometimes remind them that it's just a table around which you come. We look at difficult issues that we can't manage ourselves, and we try to come up with agreements to respond to those issues.
And now the representatives, the members that are forming part of that, maybe just come back a little bit to that. In practice, what's their role, and how much do they take back into the organisation? What sort of linkages are there between the forum and the different participating organisations?
Depending on the organisation, I mean, it's a special committee of Auckland Council. It operates quite formally. It passes resolutions. Those resolutions must be considered by those councils. Similarly, we're setting up meetings with ministers to brief them on this report, and I expect that the report is taken heed of and makes a difference.
Now, are there actually any direct activities that the forum organise? Does it set any rules, or can it do any monitoring or auditing, or does it have a budget, and what sort of resources? Just give us a bit of sense of what's behind it.
Under the Act, we're required to produce the State of the Environment report every 3 years, but the wording of the Act is not just to report on the state of the environment, but the degree of integrated management and the responses that have been made to prioritised strategic issues. So really we're, if you like, asking how well collectively that group is doing. And within the legislation, there's a set of management objectives that talk about protection and enhancement. And what we found in this report is over time, the trend is down on almost all the indicators. Now, it's not alarmingly down every 3 years, but it's a trend. So over time, as we get more people, more pressures on the Gulf, we're losing this amazing asset, which if we look after it, will actually return a hell of a lot more for us than it will if we constantly take it for granted and reduce its water quality, fish down the stocks. So the challenge for us is to change that trajectory from down to up, to start to enhance the Gulf. And, we perceive a whole lot of benefits to places like Great Barrier through the restoration of fisheries, through island biodiversity. If you take a long-term view, we're all going to be better off with a more healthy environment.
So in your role that basically advocates for a better environment with the agencies and make strong recommendations on them, do you also have an auditor type role where you sort of say, look, Council, you said you would do this, but in fact you didn't keep up to your own intentions, your own plans here. Do you sort of have a way of feeding back and being in a critical role where you sort of just give a rating card, sort of pass card to the member organisations around the Hauraki Gulf?
Yes, absolutely. I think if each organisation collects information within their mandate, what we do is we put it together and say, does it add up to enough? And therefore we are playing that auditing role, and we will continue to play that every 3 years. And that's the great thing about this report this time, is that we involved a much broader spread of people, and we're taking it out to places like this, and we've had huge coverage in the newspapers. So I think there's really a growing public understanding of really what's below the water. It always looks nice, but there are things happening there that we should be concerned about, and that should be reflected back to the political leaders, to the management agencies, and we should have a set of expectations that we see improvements.
Now, if you're talking about a growing interest by the public in terms of what's being reported, in terms of what's happening in the Hauraki Gulf, because that's interesting, because on one side what you're describing is sort of an intergovernmental committee, that's sort of just doing a bit of reporting, pushing some reports around from that would not touch on many listeners' lives and interest. On the other hand, there is good interest in your publication, the news reports and other things. How do you explain that wider public interest?
Well, I mean, people love the Gulf. I mean, we all do. We all want to use it, and but I don't think we really understand the way it works and what makes it so special. For instance, just last week, one of the Great Barrier Island pilots spotted a dead whale on his trip out here, reported it to the Department of Conservation, towed it to the Coromandel, did an autopsy on it, and found it had 15 broken vertebrae, 3 broken ribs, massive hemorrhaging, and it had obviously been hit by a ship. Now, there's only about 150 Bryde's whales that live in the Gulf, and they live there for most of their lives. They have their calves there, and I guess a lot of islanders have seen them. But the population is declining because they dive to shallow depths, they float up slowly, and they're very vulnerable to this busy waterway. So unless we understand that, unless we value that, we can take it for granted, and we might find that our children aren't able to see a Bryde's whale as we do when we take the car ferry back to town.
Now, the protection of Bryde's whales, fish in general, even the management of snowbird fisheries, that is the role of government, isn't it? Or to what extent is that responsibility also carried, or that interest carried by non-government groups? I noticed that you have good iwi representation in the committee forum, and apart from members of the various government departments, the councils involved, is there other non-governmental groups that are represented in the forum, or is there other ways for members of the wider public to become involved and have taken active part in this program?
The membership are the management agencies. They're the ones that have the skin in the game. They're the ones that ultimately do make the decisions that determine the health of the Gulf. But every forum meeting, there is an opportunity for public groups to come and make a deputation. So, for instance, the recreational fishing interests that have recently challenged in the High Court about the setting of catch for kahawai based on the requirement in the Hauraki Gulf Marine Park Act to enhance and to recognise the recreational value. I mean, that's hugely significant because it actually shows, legally, set a precedent that this Act means something, and that, in fact, means that we will see more and more kahawai in the Gulf. So the decisions are made by the members, the government departments that sit on the forum, but they are certainly influenced by the groups, and we encourage that interaction within the way we run the meeting agendas. And over time, we're finding more and more of the public are coming because they're perceiving that the issues we're dealing with are more and more relevant to them.
I'm talking to Tim Higham, the manager of the Hauraki Gulf Forum, and who's here with colleagues to present the State of the Environment report down at the Claris Health Centre in an hour and a half, 3 o'clock. I'm inviting you all to be there and to have a chance to ask questions of your own. But just to finish up here, Tim, in closing, can you sort of tell us maybe 3 pieces of good news and 3 pieces of not so good news that comes out of the process that this report represents?
I think that, the good news is probably best illustrated by what's happening on the islands, because those islands that have been able to be made predator-free, we see this amazing comeback of native birds. And so there's enough islands now in the Gulf where you're actually getting natural exchanges of species, like kaka, like bellbirds. But it also enables us to reintroduce very endangered species. I had the privilege of being on Motutapu Rangitoto just 2 weeks ago, where they introduced takahi and saddlebacks, and that's going to be a huge opportunity for tourism, for Auckland, an opportunity for people to understand what natural New Zealand looked like. It's just tremendously exciting what's happening in terms of the restoration of islands. I think what we don't realise sometimes when we look at the surface of the Gulf is just how profoundly we have changed it. And one of the things that Shane brought to my attention that I found fascinating is that there used to be mussel beds essentially right the way in the Tamaki channel between Auckland and Waiheke, right down into the Firth of Thames, and those beds were so vast that those mussels could have filtered all of the seawater of the Firth of Thames in 2 days. The remaining mussel beds would take 2 years to filter that. So there are profound losses of basic habitat, profound changes in the number of fish we're keeping in the ocean, still lots and lots of sediments and nutrients going in. In fact, the nutrients nitrates used to be mainly coming from sea, now they're mainly coming from agricultural use in the land. And so we've really got to wrestle with some important questions and work out in the long term what we value about the Gulf and how we're going to get the most from looking after it.
And maybe to answer that question, I'm going to take that forward to the next part of the interview with Raymond Pert in a moment. But thank you, Tim, for talking to us. And we're just going to have a short break and then return with a few more